So the Resident Evil 4 remake is finally actually officially a thing. I mean, it was kind of leaked like 2 years ago that they were working on it, and honestly, I feel like everyone expected this to be the next Resident Evil game with how, you know, aggressive Capcom has been with remaking all of the older games. And honestly, I was kind of in the camp of preferring them to remake Resident Evil 1. I know, there's the GameCube remake, but I would have loved to see the first game be remade in the style of the 1 and 2, not 1 and 2, the 2 and 3 remake. But 4 is probably the most popular game in the whole series, yada yada yada, blah blah blah, revolutionizing games and all of that. And with the trailer, it honestly got me really excited, even though it was only like 30 seconds. Definitely was, maybe it was longer than that. It felt short to me. But it's over a year away, so it'll probably be a little bit until any more news is released on it. So I figured, why not just speculate about what it's going to be like, or at least talk about what I'd hope to see out of it. So one thing we know for sure that they're going to do is they're basically going to redo the story. Not a complete rehash, but it's probably going to be a lot more, in depth, I would say. I would also expect more subplots because, with these older games, you basically have the objective that you are following, and then occasionally something will stop you and detour you from that objective, which it'll probably follow that same formula. But I'm expecting more, smaller things to also play a role other than get Ashley, leave with Ashley. Something stops you from doing that. Obviously, I expect this to still be the main driving force of the story, but I think there's going to be a little bit more to it, specifically with Ada. And I think better use of Ada could really make the 4 remake way better than the original. Because in the original game, Ada just randomly shows up every now and then, says some ambiguous stuff, and then dips out. I think they need to keep her mysterious, but I also think they should make Leon more involved in figuring out why she's there and being more interested in her, Because honestly, throughout all these years of games, the Ada and Leon connection has been very lackluster. Literally, there's been no relationship progress within any games for like these 10, 15 plus years. I don't know. It's been a long time. I'm not saying they need to do something drastic, but come on, make it more interesting than just she's there, she's gone, she's there, she's gone. And I think a good way to do that would be to kind of do what they did with the extra Ada mode after you do the main game in the original, and kind of put that in how the main game is going to work in the remake. Honestly, my ideal scenario is they have 2 stories, an Ada and a Leon story. Maybe the Ada one unlocks after the Leon if the story would conflict and with you doing them in whatever order you want. But I love when Resident Evil games do that. I love 1 and 2 a lot because of the campaigns you can do. I feel like those games are the most replayable because they give you the options, and doing them in different orders makes it interesting. I mean, 6 did it too, but obviously 6 did it the worst with the rehash stuff. And I don't want it to be like 6 where it's the same thing with both characters, but obviously it doesn't have to be. If they make a really well fleshed out story with both of them, they intersex at certain points, I think it would be really fun to do that. Now, I think this is very unlikely, probably nearly a 0% chance they do this because of how they did the Carlos stuff in Resident Evil 3. I feel like they're going to copy that formula where there's going to be a couple sections in the main story where you take over as Ada, which is cool and all, but I think my idea of her having her own story is a lot cooler, and it would make the game a lot longer. And I know they're not all about making the game super long. They want to make a good game at whatever length. Honestly, they've been fairly short recently, and I'm fine with that as long as it's really good. But, a little bit more effort. Well, it'd be a lot of bit more effort to make a whole new story, but I think it would go a long way with people really appreciating the game. Now, as for stuff that we can kind of assume from what we've seen in the trailer, they've shown a lot of interesting moments. There's this one overhead shot of the boat, where the lake monster is. And I really hope they make something more interesting out of that section than what it is in the original. Maybe make it more of an actual boss fight instead of a really gimmicky aim and throw harpoon thing. There's also this one shot of the village chief standing at the end of a hall. I think it's around the point where he kind of captures you in the original, near the beginning of the game. And what I think would be really cool to do with him is maybe have, during the village section, have him wander around, sort of like Mr. X, Jack from Resident Evil 7, something like that. If they added a passive stalking enemy like that, I think he would be a great fit. because he's honestly very forgetful in my opinion. I just remember that one line where he's called the Big Cheese. He might be called that many times. I don't know. I hope they keep the really weird, cringy voice lines because that's fun. But make him scary. Make him the village area, boss that you are concerned about. I think that'd be really cool. Same with the I don't remember what they're called, but the bug dudes, the twin bug dudes. I think if they had more of a presence and were more lurking about in their perspective section, I think that would go a long way to like giving them a lasting impact, making them more memorable as, big time Resident Evil enemies. Because I don't know about you guys, but honestly, the guys I remember from Resident Evil 4 as the big enemies are Sadler, yeah, because he's the main boss, but also Salazar. And that's not because of his boss fight being good. Like, honestly, the first time I played, I saved a rocket launcher and shot him once with it, and the fight was like over. But Salazar is really memorable because he shows up so much, and his whole thing is that he's annoying. And I know he's a kind of a silly boss, he's kind of like used as a joke device, but I think they could keep that because that worked really well. It gave him an identity. There's so many bosses in this game, and they're all fairly coolly designed, but they're all so brief. Like that one guy that you have to kind of escape the cage maze for, that's a really cool idea. But if they fleshed him out more, gave him more of a backstory that's visible to the player without digging deeper in, that would also pay dividends to making the game more memorable and making each boss more memorable. And also, it would lengthen the game, because who doesn't want that? I feel like very few people are going to complain about the game being long. Now, there's one other really big thing that I want to talk about, and that is how is Ashley going to work? Because in the original, there's a good amount of Ashley sections where you have to protect her, tell her to do something, she's a big part of the game. And if I'm being honest, if they mess her part up, it could make the game really annoying. Because babysitting AI is not fun for anyone if that AI is really, really dumb. So there isn't really much I can say about this, but I just really hope that the Ashley AI is really smart and completely fair to the player. Because, as you know, if Ashley dies, it's game over for you. So I'm thinking they're going to have to completely rework how Ashley works. Make her very easy to control, and make the sections that involve her very fair and probably relatively brief. Because even if the Ashley sections work well, honestly, I think most people are not going to find them that much fun. And that's just due to the nature of how it works. Because it's stressful and it's annoying. Because oftentimes a lot of it falls out of your hands. Now, honestly, the trailer looked really good. Like, very, very good. And it gave off a really serious vibe. Like, they showed the car scene from the beginning with Leon looking at the picture of Ashley, and he's like monologuing in his head. Well, I guess if it's in his head, it's not a monologue, but that's not important. Just what he was saying seemed really serious, and the tone felt different from the original. So I think that it's gonna lose a little bit of the comedic effect of the original, which honestly is not a bad thing in my eyes, as long as the game really goes for a scarier tone to back it up. Because 4 is very action heavy. There are some sections that are really pretty freaky, especially near the end of the game. And I think the setting sets up very well for a good horror game. But if they back out on the horror and try to keep it more, ammo management focused, aiming, I think it's gonna reflect poorly on the overall reception, because if it's not scary and it's serious, that's not a good sign to me. The last thing I can think of is how the controls are gonna work. Obviously, they're getting rid of tank controls, and I really don't think they throw this game into first person, so I think it's gonna be nearly identical to 2 and 3, which is interesting, because if you've played this game, you'd know most of the challenge from combat comes from how limited your range of motion is. So if we're going to be able to move as freely as we can in the past remakes, they're going to have to make the enemies tougher, which won't be that hard, and I think will be a good thing in the long run, but I also think it's going to make the game feel a lot different. I'd imagine they're going to make ammo a little more scarce, and they're going to make enemies a lot more difficult to kill, along the vein of what you would see in Resident Evil 2 and 3, where it could, it's probably gonna be luck based on if you get a crit headshot, but you gotta gauge, do I want to kill these people, do I not? And I think that's a really good thing. I love it when they allow a choice on whether or not it's a good idea to actually like waste ammo or use it. I do feel fairly confident that it will play kind of like that. Obviously, it's just speculation, but I don't I don't see first person, especially with the VR mode for Resident Evil 4 that came out for like Oculus a while back. I think that's your first person Resident Evil 4. And they're not going to do tank, so I just see it being very similar to 2 and 3. And honestly, I'm pretty excited about it. I'm not the biggest Resident Evil 4 fan. I think it's a good game, but I think a lot of the other games are significantly better than it. So I'm excited to see how this remake changes my perspective of 4. There's a lot of hype to go off of after the release of Resident Evil Village, which had the biggest, impact out of any games released from the series in a very long time. So I hope they use that as motivation to make this game really, really good. There's a lot riding on it, so I'm excited to see how it goes. I'm probably going to get the collector's edition because who can resist those freaking statues they keep putting in them? But yeah, I'm going to be keeping up to date with all the news with this stuff, so you can be prepared to hear my excitement or my disappointment depending on how it looks like it's going to go. But even if it's the worst game in the world, I'm going to be there playing it. So until there's more news, see ya.